Thank you so much for having me back. I recognize some of you from my previous presentation at the wildlife class, so good to see you again. So my name is Danika Oriol-Morway, and as Alan said, I am the director of Foster Parrots in the New England Exotic Wildlife Sanctuary. I started working with Foster Parrots as soon as I finished my final project, so that was actually before I technically graduated. And I honestly had never thought I would be working with parrots, and I definitely never thought I'd be sitting in front of a room of people proselytizing about parrots, but here I am, and I'm really thankful for it. It's been an eye-opening experience and has changed the way that I look at animals and wildlife in captivity. Prior to coming to Tufts, yes, I worked with wolves at a wolf sanctuary in Colorado, and before that I was actually the finance and logistics coordinator for a fashion designer. And before that, I was working in small animal medicine as a veterinary assistant. So I've had this sort of like jumbled career previous, but it all seems to come together in what I do now. Animal issues are human issues. They are society's issues. They are all the issues we're dealing with. Animals are just a symptom of the problems that we have in our society. So before I kind of go into my whole talk about feral arts, which is why you guys are actually here, is to hear about our art program, I have to sort of give it context to what I'm doing. So we're going to talk a bit about what is the parrot problem and why does Foster Parrots in the New England Exotic Wildlife Sanctuary have to exist? Why is what's happening to parrots relevant to art? And then how we're trying to address it through feral arts in our programming there. Let's see if I can. All right, so this is our facility. We are located in Hope Valley, Rhode Island, on the site of an old chicken farm. We are in the far left building here, this long one. That has now been renovated into a series of aviaries. We have approximately 60 aviaries. Some are in the middle of being constructed, and then sections of community living. We house 400 parrots here and a handful of other species, so turtles, tortoises, iguanas. The property itself is 23 acres. Again, this used to be a chicken farm, so the land has been heavily modified and managed. We are in the process of trying to sort of bring it back and reclaim it to a nature center. The building on the right, the one sort of parallel to the big one, is where all the chicken feces used to go, and that we're in the process of taking down. The big building on the far end of the picture here is the old packing and refrigeration plant. That has now been abandoned, and we will hopefully be taking that down. And then Feral Arts is in that white building in the far right corner. That's our art program. That was the garage center where they would fix up all the trucks and the refrigeration vehicles. So this is where I live, this is where I work, this is everything I do. And these are some of my birds. So these birds call that giant building home. Why do we need a sanctuary? Why do parrots need a sanctuary? Well, the problem is that parrots are losing their homes at an astronomical rate. The problem is parrots are a wild animal, and all their wild behaviors make them really challenging animals to cohabitate with. They're not domesticated. We, again, having 400 animals at our facility, we are turning away approximately 1 to 3 birds every day. So that means 1 to 3 birds are not finding sanctuary. By the time someone's contacting us, that bird has already been through 10 to 12 homes normally. When we say no to a bird, that bird has an uncertain future. There are not a lot of places that can deal with macaws and cockatoos. Most municipal shelters and local shelters cannot deal with a parrot, and they often have reached out to us to say, what do I do about my parrot? I also just realized I'm going to turn the lights down so you can better see these slides. But they're calling us, asking us, what do we do about these parrots? And we're, and the problem is that there's not enough people doing parrot rescue and parrot sanctuary. Parrots, like I said, are wild animals. All the qualities that make them really successful candidates for the wild make them really challenging animals to live with. So we're talking about really, really loud vocalizations. They can be heard 5 miles away. They are never out of earshot of their partner in the wild. That same ability is still in the parrot that lives in your apartment building or in your grandmother's house. Long-lived lifespans. These birds can live up to 80 to 100 years, some species. So your large birds like a cockatoo or a macaw can live well into their 80s. Their chewing abilities, they are cavity dwellers. They chew into tree trunks. They will destroy every piece of wooden furniture in your home if they have the chance to do it. And then aggression. Aggression in that beak, they are able to really do a lot of damage. You get one bite from a macaw, you never want to get another one again. So these are all things that make them really successful wild animals. They make them really challenging companion animals. Again, The behavior problems. Captivity is not an appropriate situation for parrots, for any really wild animal, because again, they're wild. They're not meant to be in captivity. We deal a lot with mutilating behaviors. So this is a male Moluccan cockatoo named Poppy. Poppy was loved desperately by his previous caretaker, and when he had to move across the country, he had to bring Poppy to us. And Poppy has always been well taken care of, always loved and supported, but he's still a mutilator. So what he's wearing in this picture, that's a Kevlar vest. And we have to replace it every couple of months because he'll end up chewing through it. We have 2 other parrots that live at our sanctuary, BB and Kiva, who are extreme mutilators. So they actually have to wear a collar forever. You take the collar off, they will, within about an hour, start mutilating themselves. You don't see this in the wild. You only see this in captivity. And to go back, you've got, this is Gracie and Tango. They're plucked. This is feather, destructive behaviors. Again, something you don't see in the wild. You see this in captivity. So one of the things we're trying to do is teach people about why animals, especially parrots, have sacrificed so much to live in our homes, in a cage in our living room, in our grandmother's living room, in your neighbor's living room, or wherever it might be. They've given up a life in the wild. They've given up a family. They've given up social, emotional support that they get from other birds. An isolated parrot, a single parrot, is a stressed and unhappy animal, no matter how you slice it. It is not the natural state of a parrot to be alone. They depend on companionship with other birds. Their high social emotional intelligence, their capacity for understanding, they understand their situation. They learn through observation. So they understand what's going on around them. And they need so much support, and we can't even begin to scratch the surface of what they need. And again, you see stress behaviors, you see frustrated animals, and that's what starts again. They start losing their homes because those stress behaviors become intolerable, and the wild behaviors are intolerable. So the whole purpose of everything I do, and every time I talk about birds, is rooted in the fact that a parrot in a cage is living the most unnatural form of its existence. And I show this slide because on the left here, this is Jack. Jack is a black-headed parrot, also known as a caïque. This photo was taken on April 7th at our sanctuary. Jack has been through several homes and rescues and sanctuaries, and he's with us. And there's absolutely nothing under the sun that we can do that makes this bird happy. We have tried giving him companionship with other birds. You're talking about medication, everything, enrichment, space. April 8th, the day after this photo was taken. This was taken in Guyana while I was there by a man named Leon Moore. And that's what Jack should look like. That's what he's designed for. And the reason he will never be happy and fully content with his existence is because he has been denied the right to his natural place in the world. And not all parrots look like Jack. No, this is an extreme case. But I want this to be a visual that kind of, if you forget everything I talk about today, I want this to at least sort of stick with you, that this is why I do what I do. And I'm trying to figure out every possible way I can change someone's mind about a bird. And whether it's making art, whether it's doing a presentation like this, whether it's making a movie, making music, inviting people, whatever I can do, I will do it and I will find a way to do it. And so what today I'm going to talk about with feral arts is one of the many ways we are addressing this problem. Adoption rescue is one of the ways, conservation is one of the ways, sanctuary is one of the ways, education. There are 1,000 ways to fix this problem. And again, art might not have any effect on it. It might end up just being a really fun exercise for me, but you know what, I'm going to try it. Because this is unacceptable. And I want to be on the right side of history when we start to realize that the way we keep animals is so inappropriate, especially the way we keep parrots. And it has become far too normalized in our society for this to be a parrot's existence. So today's theme, parrots, cognitive dissonance, and how art can change our minds. That's a bit about encompassing a little bit of everything I'm going to talk about. So we're going to start off with this. All right? Let this visual sink in for a second. It sucks. This is not okay. No animal should live like this. A bear in a cage, completely out of its natural environment, away from its life. It has water and shade, so I guess it's kind of lucky, but this is its life. A dog in a cage. Obviously, it looks like the dog lives there because you can see he's defecating right next to his food. Maybe this dog will live his whole life there. Unacceptable. Unacceptable. And I think everyone in this room can agree with me that that's unacceptable to keep a dog like this. And I hope everyone in this room can agree with me that no tiger should live like this. There's nothing in that. I mean, if that tiger is to live its entire life in that, I mean, this is abuse. 100% unacceptable, unnatural, unacceptable. We all know the cage is not a natural environment for an orangutan, a bear, a dog, or a tiger. Undeniably, everyone can agree that that is not the natural place for these animals. Yet for some reason, this visual here of this looks like a lilac-crowned Amazon in a cage. It's actually kind of normal for a lot of people. I mean, I don't get that same deep pit in my stomach of how appalled I was at the dog in a cage. Why don't I have the same reaction to this image? And why is this something that we see constantly in people's homes? Because the experience of this parrot is no different than the experience of that orangutan or that dog or that tiger or that bear. None of these animals are living in their natural state, in their natural place. We have been inundated and we've been conditioned by society, and again, parrots have lived alongside people for a very long time. But we have been absolutely conditioned to think that the state of a parrot or a flighted animal is totally okay to be in a cage. You walk through the pet store, you get your dog food or your cat food, and you're gonna walk by a bunch of finches and budgies and maybe cockatiels, maybe even conures, species that can live into their 30s. And we walk past it thinking it's completely normal. And on the TV, it's completely normal, a parrot in a cage, a parrot on a perch. You ask a kid to draw a picture of an eagle, they're gonna probably draw an eagle with its wings out flying, maybe with a fish in its claws. You ask a kid to draw a picture of a parrot, it's probably on a perch or on a pirate shoulder. A very static image, a very one-dimensional version of this animal that has such unbelievable abilities and qualities and has such a robust life. So we have been basically conditioned to visually accept the sight of a parrot in a cage as natural. The natural state of a parrot is not in a cage. And I repeat, the natural state of a parrot is not in a cage under any circumstance. This is a red and green macaw flying through Kiter Falls in Guyana. This is what they're designed to do. Their brain, their soul, their very essence, their body, their heart, their breathing system, their wings, their bones, their feathers. Every inch of this animal was designed for flight and to engage in the environment in this unbelievable way possible that we can't even fathom. So what is cognitive dissonance? The state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes, especially as relating to behavioral decisions and attitude change. Is that what we're dealing with? Are we not applying the same logic that we use to, or the same emotional relationship that we have about the dog and the tiger, the orangutan and the bear? Are we not applying that to a parrot? And why? And this is something that I'm working through. I'm not a parrot person. I'm very new to this, and we're all challenging, and I'm challenging my own exceptions and my own framework that I've used to understand these animals. This right here is a problem. Both animals equally deserving of respect, dignity, and our ability to have a complete picture of them. Yet for some reason, we still just haven't given parrots that shift yet. And I know it's very new that wild animals have been given this sort of respect and have the narrative about quality of life in captivity and whatnot. Parrots are just for some reason pretty far behind, because we're still keeping them in our homes in conditions that we would find unacceptable for any other animal we kept in our home. The way that we see parrots and the conditions we see parrots coming to us, if you ever did that to a dog or a cat in your home, it would be considered abuse. And it's completely standard operating procedure for so many people that bring their birds to us. So what does art have to do with cognitive dissonance? Well, art is the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination. typically in a visual form, such as a painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. The emotional power is the part that I want to focus on, because that is what's missing. And I believe that that is where we are getting caught up in our relationship to parrots and our inability to have the same reaction to that visual of a parrot in a cage versus the visual of a dog in a cage. The other visuals have emotional power over us. For some reason, the parrot does not. And now, is this an issue of representation? Is this an issue of just how we've accepted visually these animals to be? I think so. Art has the ability to give us the feeling of being emotionally engaged with something we didn't know we cared about. And that's really kind of what I am trying to do here. It's like, okay, well, if the actual sight of a parrot in a cage is not upsetting to us yet, how do we get people to start looking at parrots differently? And so we've got the, you can talk about why they're bad animals for captivity, because they can fly and they're long lifespans and they're intelligent and social emotional. You can talk about all these things that logically make sense to me why a parrot shouldn't be in a cage, but are also the same logical reasoning people used to say why they're amazing animals, because they have these long lifespans and they're such great companion animals because they bond so deeply to somebody or something, because they are interesting and they are charismatic and engaging. So I've got these two sort of logical frameworks here that both defend for and defend against keeping parrots in captivity. So perhaps making art, viewing art, creating and being creative in our understanding to it in our relationship to these animals helps us challenge those logical frameworks that right now are contradictory. So can the act of making or viewing art help us challenge our assumptions? Can art tell a story? Of course it can. So Lola's story. Lola is a red and green macaw, most likely from Guyana, and came to Foster Parrots when Lola was about 50 years old. Lola suffered years and years of abuse. And unfortunately, Lola's story is not uncommon. Lola was living with another parrot in a woman's house, and the woman loved the parrots very much, took great care of them, but she passed on. And so the next person, the next family, next whoever it was in line got Lola. They hated Lola. Lola screamed. Lola wanted to be with a bird, not with people. So Lola got shoved into the basement, was kept in a basement by himself for years and years and years. And eventually, sometimes, the family would come down and kick the cage and scream at Lola to shut up. And so Lola became stressed. Sometimes they'd forget to feed Lola. Sometimes they would forget to give Lola water. This was Lola's life. And then one day, Lola was let out of the cage and was promptly attacked by a dog. And what you will notice is that all the visuals I'm going to show you of Lola only show the right side of his face, because the left side was so desperately damaged by this attack. Lola was also left with chronic seizures, and as a result would go months being totally fine, but then would have debilitating seizures. And eventually someone found out about the condition that this bird was being kept, and they contacted Foster Parrots, and Lola came to live with us. And Lola, everyone said, you've got to put this bird down. This bird is suffering. This bird has gone through so much. Like, you can't do this. And, the founders of my organization, they're like, we need to give this bird a chance. We need to, give it another chance in the light and see if we can do something. And the most amazing thing about wild animals is their undying will to live. And that is a really, really powerful part about Lola. And Lola's story became that of one of absolute tragedy to one where Lola ended up finding a new partner in a bird. The seizures lessened and was actually rehabilitated to somewhat of a degree, until eventually Lola did have to pass on, and that was about 2 years ago. But Lola's story and meeting Lola for so many people changed the way they felt about birds. And that Lola then went on his story, to be told by so many people. And it inspired stories and songs and poetry and paintings and graphics and bags and all sorts of things. And so Lola's story carried on beyond just Lola's life. And that's where the various artists that got excited about Lola's story started wanting to spread the word. So again, here's just a graphic somebody made, a bag somebody made, and trying to sort of spread the word. A painting by a woman named Ginny Bly, Lola, again, only of the right side of the face. Picture of a rainbow in the trees. We've got, again, more graphics. And these are people that Lola's story resonated with them, and they decided to make art because of that. Something about it connected with them. People writing poetry about Lola. I always have a hard time reading this one because it always sort of brings me to tears. But deep within the soul of the lonely caged bird beats the rhythm of a distant forest, etched upon its broken heart, the faded memory of flight. And this was written again by Ginny Bly, who did that first painting. And this was about Lola. But this is a poem that we use as a representation of all of the experience of our birds. And this is where art really helps people express themselves and become an advocate for the animals that they are learning about. So it's taking the story, taking that experience, and bringing it beyond the walls of my sanctuary and my facility. A lovebird story. This is another one of our artists. Lovebirds are a very common pet. You will see them in Petco's, PetSmarts all over the place. They are sort of a throwaway species. We've actually found them literally in the garbage. People have very little respect for the small birds. It's just a big bird in a small body. But I'm just going to let you guys look at the visual that I'm going to show next, which is a comic by a student named Alex Suarez. And he's a student at RISD, and we met him through Lucy Spellman at the Creature Conserve Project. It's a story about lovebirds who find each other in the wild. They fall in love in the wild. They live together in the wild. And they spend their time preening each other just like wild birds do. And then one day they are sleeping peacefully in their tree and their family. And the tree is chopped down and they're put into cages and they're taken off to some distant land. And this is the story of so many birds. And Alex, who came never working with parrots, he came to our facility and he spent hours sitting in front of our lovebird aviary just watching them, learning about their stories, learning about them. And his sketches were these little tiny faces and their little expressions. And he got so wrapped up into the life of these animals, into the fact that they had this dynamic experience, this dynamic life. He wanted to share the story of their tragedy, of how they ended up at a place like Foster Parrots. And the funny thing about this, though, we asked him, why did you have them captured together? Because the reality is parrots in the wild, when they are captured from the wild and transported, 1/3 of them do not make it through transport because it's such a horrific experience in capture. But 2, they also never are actually kept together. They're separated from their families, from their offspring, from whatever it might be. And Alex, who was like, a guy who just started to scratch the surface of the parrot issue and his relationship to parrots, said, it was too sad. I couldn't do it. My heart was breaking when I made this, and I just couldn't do that. He's like, I want people to be able to read this comic and not be too sad. And, I appreciate the honesty, and I appreciate that it is that sad. And it was that sad for him, because for him, he just sat, watched these birds, and then tried to tell their story. And the emotional power that the story had, and the act of creating and retelling that story changed him. And it allowed him to acknowledge really how tough this issue is and how emotional this issue is. Sometimes we're telling our own story when we're making art about animals and when we're talking about our relationship to animals. This is where I'm going to need the music. Let's see if I can do this. Actually, I'm going to go back. So these are paintings done by a group of kids that came to Foster Parrots and walked around and we met our birds, we talked about the birds, and they then created art about the parrots and what they saw. And what I love about these images, one is just how much color and dynamic they are. And this is just, again, kids spending time looking at these birds, understanding the birds, learning about their stories. We even then had a group that came in and spent a week with us kayaking, hiking, looking at bugs and birds out in the wild, coming in, meeting our birds, listening to the birds' stories. And at the end of the week, we said, all right, let's put a song together. And I actually was not involved in this project. There was the woman before me, but they said, all right, let's put all of your experiences together, all of the things you did here, what you learned about the birds, what you learned about yourselves, and let's write a song. Let's make music. So the kids wrote a song. They chose all the lyrics. They talked about their experiences. They picked all the musical parts, and then we had a band come in and actually make the music that these kids had put together. And this is the song. Just listen to the lyrics, because this is all about the kids' experience being around the animals.
I'm afraid of the wolf spider, I'm afraid of the bee that stings. I'm afraid to kayak in the water, never know when you might fall in. I'm afraid of the wolf spider, I'm afraid of the bee that stings. I'm afraid to kayak in the water, never know when you might fall in. We are like the birds, trapped in classrooms, trapped in cages, wanting to be free. We are like the birds, wanting to explore nature all around, you and me. The water was refreshing on a hot summer day. The when we tried to paddle, we flew the wrong way. We saw a blue heron and moving side to side, watching us on the river and the dragonfly. We are like the birds, trapped in cities, trapped in cages, wanting to be free. We are like the birds, wanting to explore the nature all around, you and me. When we were out biking, our minds were moving fast, hearing and watching all the animals we passed.
So this is like one of my favorite songs ever, obviously, because it's about our birds. But it's about what kids can learn through storytelling, through exposure, through experience, and then having the ability to share that. And right there, that's that sort of empathy gap that we often see with things. And the kids got it. I mean, they saw themselves in these birds, and they created this wonderful, beautiful song. And for me, it's all about when we learn about these stories, we hear about what's going on, and then we become the storyteller, we become the advocate. And all the different ways we can do that is so empowering, and it's all the different ways we can continue reaching, again, beyond the work that we do at our facility. And that is the power of art. And this is what I want to continue doing. So that's where Feral Art steps in. We've been doing art education for a long time, and doing outreach and all that stuff I just showed you, stuff we've been doing over the years. We finally, in the last year, actually spent time and created a workshop in a space where we can invite the community in to make art, to participate, and to learn how to speak their voice and be an advocate for these animals in whatever way creatively inspires them. Also, the reality is that not everybody wants to come to the sanctuary and clean poop, because that's a lot of what we do there. We want people to come and be able to engage in what we're doing and be a participant. That doesn't have to be husbandry and animal care. It can be painting, drawing, sewing, welding. We do glasswork, we do carpentry, we do printmaking. We even have a little tiny house co-op. These are all different ways that we want people to get into our facility, come meet my birds, learn about what we're doing, find your place. And if it doesn't mean on the floor with the birds, find your place. You all have a voice. You can all share this story in whatever way possible. And Feral Arts, it's really about that. It's about giving people an opportunity to have a voice in this. And also to, again, bridge that accessibility gap. A lot of people are still just learning how we can be involved in animal welfare beyond being a veterinarian, a vet tech, or an actual rescuer or rehabber. You can be anything you want to be and be involved in animal welfare and animal rescue. And that is the crux of what our workshop does. So there's sort of two parts to our workshop. This is the entranceway to Feral Arts. Again, it's sort of an old building that we've been pulling together, but it's a physical space. This is our main area where the artists work and set up their studios. We have two separate bays. One is a carpentry area and one's a painting area. And it's all a work in progress. This has only been a year long and mostly unpaid volunteer labor. But we want people to come in, use this space, set up, learn how to use the equipment, learn how to make art, be inspired what they're seeing, be inspired what they're doing, and also be surrounded by other like-minded people. So we're talking about people interested in environmental issues, animal welfare issues, human issues. That sort of, it's all part of the same thing. Here's our tiny house community. This is available for our artists who want to come and make art, and making art's expensive, and it doesn't make a lot of money. So again, I understand we want to support our artists to be able to be as creative and unadulterated in their creativity as possible. So come, I just ask you, don't you volunteer 10 hours a week at the sanctuary and you can get a place to stay. We are in the process of maybe building a hammock hut for people to come and put up a hammock for the summer and hang out. And it's about cooperative living. It's coexistence with each other and these animals and learning how to, again, just be a part of this in a way that you wouldn't normally think about. I want an electrician to feel empowered to be an animal advocate and to be able to be a part of this. I want a carpenter to feel empowered to be an animal welfare advocate and be a part of this. And it's all about that. It's about being together in this thing and tackling this issue, which is, you know, parrots are just one of the issues. It's just a really big one. So our artist in residence, one of whom is here, Travis in the far corner. We currently have 5 artists in residence, and then we have 14 active, sort of engaged people who want to help us make cool stuff happen. The 5 artists in residence, they have a station set up in the facility, and they do either volunteer work or help out around the sanctuary. Pat here on the left is a RISD, well, was a RISD student. He's a furniture maker. And so he now makes all the structures for the birds, and he makes these really beautiful dynamic environments for the birds using the skills that he learned as a furniture maker. We have Goldie over here on the guitar. She's from the Philippines. She does a traditional style of glasswork and does small torch blowing. We'll see some of her work. And then you've got Ani on the far right, who's a tattoo artist and printmaker. Really, really phenomenal graphic designer. Amazing. And then we've got Travis and Sean jumping in the middle. Sean on the left is a carpenter, and Travis on the right is a welder. And then my pooch Nemo, who hangs out at the shop. So all together, this sort of wacky team of artists are making some amazing things happen. And what they're doing is they're creating a space and a community to bring people in. And one of the things that we are going to be doing this summer is we will be hosting artist demonstrations to the public. So once a month, either on a Friday or Saturday night, we'll be inviting the public in to come meet our artists, watch them make some art, learn how to make some art. And then we're going to show a nature documentary or some type of animal, environmentally conscious film, and just be a resource for our community. We're in a pretty rural area. We're in South County, Rhode Island. It's considered USDA registered rural farming land. There's not a lot of stuff going on in the evenings, especially for kids. So we are trying to be a place for people to come, get this experience, and explore how they can be a part of this. This is just one of the sculptures that Goldie did. She actually did this before she set up her studio. We're just asking people to make art, again, that's relevant to their relationship to the world around them, to their relationship to animals, relationships to people and the environment. But this is Goldie working, doing a really small series on birds. And this is her little section, they're torch blowing. And here's Ani, some of her work, some of her printmaking. Again, the stories of the pelicans who have been so desperately, you know, just their environments, and they're physically destroyed from the oil spills. Cockatoos is one of our cockatoos. And then she's actually working with me right now on making a identification and coloring book for students in Guyana. We do have a conservation project in Guyana in 3 of the villages, and we will be giving this to the villages for the schools and the students to use to help them learn how to identify their birds and connect with their birds. This is some of Travis's work. He is, again, a metal artist. So what we have here on the left is a giant wolf skull. Wolves are more of his inspiration than birds, and that's okay. You don't have to be about birds just to come to the feral arts also. We are equal opportunity animal lovers. But the cool thing about the piece on the left here is there's actually a human skull inside of the wolf skull. And again, it's art that's about our relationship to animals in some way, shape, or form. We've got a metal, you know, again, more metal work on the right here, and a giant metal and plastic pink wolf, which you guys can ask me about later if you want. And then Patrick, one of the guys who does he does a lot of the building in the sanctuary. He does collect fallen feathers, and he doesn't sell these, but he trades them and uses them as a thank you gift for people that help the sanctuary and people who come and participate. And these are all feathers from our birds. And here's our Winnebago. So one of the things we are doing in part of our sort of community engagement work is, again, making cool, awesome, dynamic spaces. Someone donated this crummy old Winnebago, and we are going to be turning into a music stage this summer. and also hopefully hosting some bands and some actors and whatnot to come and hang out. And again, another way to be a part of the animal welfare movement. Come fix up a weird Winnebago and turn it into something awesome, and then come dance on stage and make music. It's all rooted in our philosophy. It's all rooted in what we're doing. It's all connected. So we're talking about community engagement. We're talking about creating a creative space, and we're talking about teaching people how to be advocates for these animals in every way possible. This is the actual facility. It's not a very nice picture because it's winter and gross. And it's just some of the stuff we're doing. We're making murals, we're making art. It's a little Mad Max, to be honest. So you have to be willing to deal with all the challenge of that. But let this be a sort of standing, open invitation to everyone in this room and everyone who's listening on WebEx right now, that if you are inspired by animals, or if you are creatively inclined, or if you're not and you want to learn how to be, please come visit. Please come tour my facility, meet my birds, learn their stories, make art, tell their stories. They need your voices in every way possible. The photography, all these photos of the birds were taken by a feral arts artist who came and stayed with us for a few days. The birds need you, the animals need you. And I'm going to close with a slide. This is Jane Goodall, the most amazing woman on the planet. She came to our facility last year and did a tour, and we spent the whole time talking about parrots and telling their stories. And at the end of it, we're all hanging out in the garden. She turns to the staff and the volunteers and she says, "You guys have to tell their stories." She's like, "People need to hear these stories." And I realized that's so much of what Jane Goodall does. She travels around the world and she tells people the stories of the people and the animals that she meets. So she's a storyteller. And perhaps that's all art is, and that's all I'm asking people to do, is to become a storyteller, tell the stories of these birds, connect people emotionally. Let's develop that emotional power that these animals can have over us so that we can be better advocates for them and be more creative in our approach. And my last slide, my favorite slide, our four-legged parrot. It's all about creativity, guys. But if you have any questions or comments, or if you just want to come and hang out, you are always welcome. So. Any questions? Yeah.
So, has anyone looked into factors that kind of lead to the self-injurious behaviors and trying to injure? I mean, has there been any successful, amelioration of that?
It's a good question, and there's a lot of people have theories as to what's causing this, the feather destruction and mutilation, and then the self-harm. I think the reality is there's so much going on with these parrots that a parrot in one condition and a parrot in another condition, one might engage in mutilation and the other one might not, and you really don't know why. Some people say it's frustration, potentially sexual frustration, the frustration of not being able to engage in natural behaviors, the inability to fly. Like their body and everything that they're wired to do is not really met in captivity. And so there is some amount of frustration. Is it an inappropriate self-soothing that's happening? We don't really know. And again, there's been some, I guess, you can medicate to a degree with gabapentin perhaps, but it's a really inconsistent and ineffective. And it's, birds that have gone through horrific abuse in just horrible situations, sometimes never pluck, they never mutilate. And the birds that have been absolutely desperately loved by their family and have been taken care of and given all the best veterinary care and enrichment possible, they still pluck and they still mutilate. So I don't have a good answer on it, but again, it is something you only see in captivity.
Do you have decent populations of single species that are healthy and injurious?
In our, so we have a lot of Amazon parrots and various subspecies of Amazon. I believe there's 50 subspecies of Amazon. We might have, 15 represented at the sanctuary. They don't tend to pluck. At least in our facility, they don't. We're seeing the plucking and the mutilation generally in our cockatoos and in our macaws. Blue and gold macaws especially. I don't know what it is about the species that seems to be somewhat more high-strung, but you do see a lot of feather mutilation and plucking happening with them. The cockatoos, especially male Moluccan cockatoos, they are the ones that go for their chest. They are the ones that generally self-harm to such an extent. So our 3 cockatoos that are extreme mutilators are all male Moluccan cockatoos. So, sometimes just changing the environment, giving them a partner, these are things that can help. So we always do tell people when you have a bird that is plucking or self-harming to be creative, figure out, try different things because you don't know what might help. But generally, once it starts, it's really hard to stop. Any other questions? All right. Well, oh, yes.
Why do you call it feral arts?
Because it's kind of feral. It's kind of like I feel like what we're doing is, so like the idea of feral is something perhaps that was once domesticated that has now been rewilded, but there's this sort of contradiction of, and maybe that's what we're trying to do is rewild a little bit. Maybe we're trying to allow people to be unadulterated and be just like themselves and tell the stories and be engaged in whatever way possible and to step out of this idea of, I'm going to be in my soapbox, I'm going to tell people this is why parrots should be here and this is the way we should take care of them, and to get out of this sort of rigidity of how we advocate for them and to go into a more fluid, wild, approach to it. It's a wild animal. We should be as dynamic in our approach to addressing it as they are in and of themselves.
So do you think domestication can be done right, or companion animals with regard to birds, can be done right, or you think it should be, kind of phased out?
My personal opinion is that I don't think any parrot should live in captivity, unless for the sole purpose of repopulating a wild population for conservation. They're not domesticated. We're not seeing a shift in behaviors with these animals after years of being bred in captivity. Everything that is, makes my birds, that a lot of our birds are coming from these really prolific breeding facilities that just pump out birds generation, and they do it quick. The birds we have have all those same instincts still intact, the hormonal swings, the aggression, the desire for flight and companionship, it's all still there. So we're not seeing domestication really happening with this species or any of the parrot species. So my feeling, no, I don't think they should. I think I've seen enough horrific responses to captivity to make me never want to see a bird in a cage again. I think, it has to be the 11th hour for me to feel that it's okay to keep a bird in a cage. It has to be that species is on the brink of extinction and there is no turning back. Otherwise, I think all conservation efforts need to be grassroots, on the ground, community-based. You save a species, but you don't save the habitat. Well, then where's it going to go back? I think, conservation is something I'm very new to, and I'm just starting to kind of dip my feet into it. But, you want a wild genetic lineage, realistically, for any species to thrive. You need the culture of that species is intact. So if you take all the animals out of the wild and stick them in a cage, you've lost the culture of that wild species, and they have to recreate it. And so you now have this sort of managed, impacted. So I really think that it's got to be the last resort is to keep a parrot in captivity for conservation efforts. It's really the last resort. We're working right now with the sun parakeets in Guyana, which are also a highly threatened endangered species. We were able to count about 150, and that's been the most robust population count done in Guyana in the last 15 years, I believe. And that's a species that used to be just all over the country, and now they are left in this little tiny, tiny pocket in between Brazil and Guyana in a small village called Caraçabai. And if you just leave the birds alone, they will repopulate so quickly. They are prolific breeders, most parrots are, and if you just leave them alone, they'll do fine. But we are not good at leaving nature alone, and so it's I don't like birds in cages. It's really got to be the last resort. Mhm.
Last semester you told us about your school bus.
Yes.
Have you made any progress on the school bus?
The school bus, I now have one of our artists is living in the school bus, and he is fixing it up. It is not drivable, I don't think, yet, but we have, the school bus is now being occupied by someone, and we are now fixing up our other vehicle to become a tiny home, which will also, I didn't have enough time to get it on a slide, but we will soon have another tiny home vehicle for someone to come stay in. Open invitation for anyone who wants to live in a bus and or little tiny truck.
If people don't live in the tiny homes in my student, then much better have people.
Yeah.
Where do you get most of your financial support?
Good question. So it's about 50-50 grants donations. Our operating budget is about $500,000 a year. Our probably number one expense is payroll. Second is our electrical bill. Food is expensive, veterinary care is expensive, but those are all things, one, that we do get donated, and we do get heavily discounted veterinary care. But just keeping the place warm is pretty expensive. The workshop, Feral Arts, has been more or less unfunded up until very recently. We did get our first grant. It was $10,000 to renovate the space. But that was our first actual influx of money into the art program. Everything else has been volunteer hours from creative people that wanted to come make some cool stuff. But the facility itself is, we do a lot of begging.
Do you think the veterinary profession should be more critical of zoos and captivity in general?
Really good question. I can't tell. Yeah.
Provide some context. So I work on admissions here to help out with interviews, and it's kind of fascinating to watch incoming students come in with experience in either zoos or breeding facilities. And my preconceived notion was that they would, at least some, would be somewhat highly critical. But it's severely uncommon. It's almost like you see this dissonance, kind of entrained to some degree. And, of course, everyone's critical of unaccredited zoos and things of that nature, but the response to, captivity in general is, for the most part, pretty, supportive
Mm-hmm.
in many ways.
I mean, again, I can only speak for myself, and I don't like to tell other people how to think and what they should be saying, but, I do think we have a responsibility to the animals that we've put into captivity to make sure that it's within context and people understand the bigger picture and the bigger story, and to always, if we have an animal in a cage, are we doing it justice and doing the wild counterparts justice by keeping it in a cage? Or are we just perpetuating the notion that animals are appropriate to be kept in cages? And that's sort of what I was kind of talking about in the beginning, this idea of we have to sort of shift our framework of the way we look at an animal. And maybe it's a visual issue, maybe it's an intellectual issue, I don't know. But I think that zoos and veterinarians and anybody that works with animals, it's all part of having the bigger picture of what's going on in the back of our minds at all times. And veterinarians especially are the first line of defense for these guys. I mean, you're the first one that gets to see an animal when it's sick or injured, or, and we are really lucky. We work with 3 amazing veterinarians that are extremely sensitive to the issue of parrots, and they are all advocates for not keeping parrots in cages. And they're telling this to their clients. And I appreciate them so much, because that is part of those are their clients. This is what supports them. But they also realize that, birds and parrots are not thriving in the home, and they're not thriving in captivity. And you see it even in the best of zoos, unhappy parrots, just like we see unhappy elephants.
There was an interesting parallel on the Tufts Facebook page, I think just yesterday, with one of the former students commenting on the challenges of breeding in dogs and, selecting for coat color rather than, behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Selecting for coat color.
Interesting. Not sure if somebody had a question back there.
I think that's about all the time we have.
All right,
Thanks so much, Danika.
cool, thank you guys. Come visit.